Do you find it difficult to stay motivated in the long term? And do you have a hard time to stay focused, even on things that are important to you? Do you get started with something new and exciting, just to give up after 1 or 2 weeks? And or are you a very accomplished person who already recently had a big win and then lost all motivation, fulfillment, and drive? But the thought, what now? Now, if any of that is the case, and if you want to reach a new level of performance, meaning, fulfillment, and life satisfaction, then it's likely that you don't manage the neurochemical in your brain that is responsible for motivation, desire, and reward. Dopamine. Now, when it comes to dopamine, knowledge is power. Certainly, you can follow motivation tips, but personality just doesn't scale. What works for person A doesn't work for person B. And I'm sure that you've tried many things to motivate yourself. However, the neurobiology of motivation scales. And that is why in this video, I will show you everything that you need to know about managing dopamine, but also serotonin in your brain, to boost your motivation to new heights. For example, did you know that working for a reward that you deeply desire, such as a promotion in your job and celebrating your wins, did you know that both of these things can actually kill your motivation and success? If not, stay tuned to figure out how to fix that. Now, if you're excited, please do me a favor and take a moment to smash those like and subscribe buttons down there so that we can build an army of high performance and neuroscience enthusiasts together. I will highly appreciate that. Now, that said, my name is Nicholas. I'm a neuroscientist, dementia researcher, as well as a high performance and flow coach. And this is how to manage your dopamine for long-lasting motivation, fulfillment, and inner drive. Now, briefly, to start with, today we focus on the mesolimbic reward pathway, because what you need to know is that there are two brain areas that produce dopamine. Now, the first one is known as the ventral tegmental area, which is depicted right here. And all rewards and all motivation-related behaviors are regulated by neurons in this brain area, in the ventral tegmental area, that sends dopamine to other brain regions. Now, that aside, there's also a second brain area with dopamine-producing neurons, not depicted here, by the way, which is known as the substantia nigra. And the substantia nigra, this dopamine pathway, it controls movement. And what you find is that the dopamine neurons in this region, they die during Parkinson's disease. Now, as a side note, I did some research in Parkinson's disease myself, and I looked at the protective effects of some gut hormones, for example, the hunger hormone ghrelin, on these dopamine neurons in the substantia nigra. But that aside, in today's video, once again, we will exclusively focus on the reward pathway. Now, generally, dopamine belongs to one of three major neurochemicals that produce happiness in the brain, also known as the happiness trifecta. And these three happiness neurochemicals include dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is the social bonding neurochemical, by the way. And as I said, what is also often included in this happiness trifecta is endorphins. Now, endorphins are painkillers. Generally spoken, if your dopamine levels are high, then you feel very pleasurable. And again, dopamine is the reward neurochemical. So what dopamine does is gives you this rewarding feeling when you get a reward. Makes sense. Now, another key effect is that dopamine increases your focus and your attention. That means when you have high levels of dopamine in your brain, you're very focused, you're more engaged, and you're less easily distracted. And of course, there's also the motivational aspect to it. So what dopamine also does is to make you motivated to push for a desired reward. More about that later in a second. Now, less known actually is that dopamine also plays a big role in pattern recognition and creativity. And because of that, dopamine has a very important role in learning. Now, for example, it could be you could be reading about a new thing. Maybe you read a book about your most favorite topic and you discover something new. And the process of discovering something new, novelty that is, it releases dopamine in your brain. And dopamine will then sharpen your focus and your attention on this fascinating detail that you have just discovered. And the dopamine motivates you. It encourages you to follow your curiosity and to read even further, to learn even more. And since dopamine also increases your attention, you also have an easier time to find new things and to link similar ideas that you come across. Now, this is actually a biological process to animate us humans to look into novel things that could be beneficial for our survival. For example, if you discover, let's say, a banana tree in a novel spot, then there could be more banana trees down the road. And hence, dopamine again is released in your brain to push you, to make you curious, and to follow your curiosity to look for more banana trees. Now, generally, as I mentioned earlier, getting a reward releases dopamine in your brain. This then gives you a rewarding feeling and it makes you happy. Thereafter, however, because dopamine production decreases after a reward, you experience a slump in your mood. And this slump in your mood is proportional to how big your dopamine hit was. Now, we'll go into that in more detail later because it plays an important role in motivation. Now, important is that after getting a reward, just anticipating to get another reward releases just as much dopamine. So getting the reward and anticipating the reward both release almost the same amount of dopamine. And what this does, that means anticipating a reward, what this does to you is that it produces cravings. So those cravings then motivate you to get another reward. Now, there's also a crucial distinction to make here, and that is that dopamine, the real role of dopamine is all about motivation. Dopamine is actually less about pleasure. And this reminds me of a fun mouse study that was actually mentioned by Andrew Huberman in his podcast. He has an amazing podcast. Definitely listen to it if you haven't heard it. But he talked about a mouse study. And they used genetically modified mice that had the disrupted dopamine system in their brain and had normal mice. And they put both mice just besides their most favorite food. And guess what? Both mice enjoyed their food just at to the same level. So even the mice that had issues, that had no dopamine in the brain whatsoever, even those enjoyed their food. But the funny thing is, what happened is that when they took those mice that had a disturbed dopamine system and put it 1 centimeter away, just 1 centimeter away from the food, the mice were too lazy to get food. Believe it or not, the mice were too lazy to make 2 steps to get to the food. And that is really all dopamine is about. Dopamine is about motivation. Dopamine is about getting rewards, getting the things that you desire, and about desire itself. Also important to notice that dopamine is also more about pain than pleasure, funny enough. Now, dopamine does make us happy, don't get me wrong here. But what happens is that the pleasure that we get from a reward, it actually decreases over time. And it makes sense. For example, let's say your favorite food. Let's say you love pizza. So you eat pizza, super delicious, super tasty. But if you were to eat your favorite food, pizza, for example, every single day, then over time it would get stale. It would get boring. And again, this is because dopamine loses its rewarding effect. However, in turn, what happens is that the pain of not having the reward goes up. So what this means in this example is that not eating pizza would cause you physical pain. You would feel really bad. You would start to crave it. And the reason why you want to eat more pizza is because you want to get rid of those cravings. So it's not to experience pleasure, but to get rid of the pain of not having it. And that means that we seek rewards, that we mostly seek rewards, and the dopamine the rewards give us, again, to quench the pain of not having the reward. Now, as a side note, there's also a so-called dopamine prediction error, and that is that the dopamine that you get from a reward is that what you would normally get from the reward minus what you expect. So let's say if your parents, let's say, promise you a PC, a new laptop for your birthday, then it's less joyful for you getting the laptop because it was promised to you. Again, the rewarding feeling that you get from something is what you would get minus what you expect. So if you expect it, you always decrease the pleasure associated with it. Now, what you also need to know, very important for motivation, now we get into the big meat, is that there are two types of dopamine motivated behaviors. The first one is that you can do an activity to get an external reward, for example, to win the championship trophy in this example here. Or second, you can do the activity for the sake of the activity itself. For example, because you love and you crave playing football. Now, that means that you crave the flow that the activity gives you, which I will talk about in a moment. Very important also. And believe it or not, the truth is, if you do what you do to get a reward, then you will probably fail. For example, here's a 1973 study. It's actually mind-blowing. Simple but mind-blowing, in fact. And what happened here is that children who enjoyed drawing, so they naturally enjoy drawing, they love doing it, they were either A, promised a reward for drawing, then B, given a reward after drawing without the children's knowledge, so it was just a surprise, or C, the kids were just left as they were, so just had to draw. And what happened is that the children who were promised and then given a reward, they actually spent 50% less time to draw after they got a reward. So their motivation was destroyed. In other words, this is because drawing was not the reward anymore. The kids basically drew to get another external reward instead. And since drawing didn't feel rewarding to the kids anymore, since the kids didn't get the dopamine from drawing anymore, there was no reason to do it for them anymore. So once again, more precisely, to work for a reward decreases the pleasure and the dopamine associated with doing the task, or drawing in this case. That means that if you work for a reward, then you kill your long-term motivation to do the activities that get you the reward. And it's also doing what you love. So that means having passion and purpose for what you do is so critical, and why I, as a coach, also as my very first step, always teach my clients to find their passion and their purpose. So I help them doing that. Now, on a bigger scale, to get your dopamine from an external reward is also what causes the what now thought that many driven individuals actually have after reaching the grand goal that have set for themselves. Now, I actually experienced this myself to go deeper into this, because as a pupil, I actually had a best friend and best rival, as I say, and we competed in everything. And honestly, my goal just became to freaking beat him, because I thought I was just better than him. And what ended up happening is that I actually, in fact, graduated as the best in my entire school. But then I changed schools. I guess what happened? Well, my grades, they just deteriorated. I basically only studied hard to beat my rival. But then I did this. I reached my goal. And since the goal was gone, and since the dopamine I was getting was gone, there was no point in studying anymore. And it's not like studying was particularly fun to me, so I didn't enjoy the activity, and I only did it again to beat my rival to get this external rewards that I desired. Also crucial to know is that occasional moodiness or a slump after a dopamine high is in fact normal. Now, in contrast to what most people think, you do not stay in a high, but the opposite happens. A dopamine high is always followed by a low. And this is because dopamine is an expensive molecule, and it takes a while to replenish the dopamine stores in your brain. Also, the dopamine high that you experience is proportional to the slump that you experience afterwards. Now, for example, if you celebrate really hard and you have a big dopamine high, then you feel the negative effects on your mood the next day. So it can literally make you lazy, unmotivated, or even depressive after having a big celebration or after having that big dopamine shot or dopamine hit. Now, likewise, there's also a slump in mood after very intense work bouts. This means that when you get your dopamine from an activity at work and you work for hours and hours and hours with very deep focus, that will also get you into flow. More about it in a second. Then you're likely to feel a bit moody the next day. Now, to get back to the drawing study, the dopamine slump is also a reason why you should not celebrate your wins all the time. You may get a dopamine high during celebrating and partying. It will feel amazing, obviously, as you would expect. But you'll experience a dopamine slump thereafter that will kill your motivation and it will kill your drive to continue pushing your goals. However, we never celebrate on the other hand. So what that also does is then that you will lose motivation. And likewise, you will feel like you never make any progress. So what's the solution? I just popped it in for you guys, and the solution is to mix it up and make the reward random. Just look at the graph, at the study once again. When the surprise was unexpected, the children continued to enjoy drawing, and they continued to get the dopamine from doing the activity that they loved. For example, what you can do to make things random is to just flip a coin. Just flip a coin, and this will decide whether you celebrate your win or not. Or you can just celebrate your win every fifth time, for example. But once again, do not do it all the time because, again, getting a reward, celebrating wins, all of that could mess you up the next few days, and it could mess up your motivation, your mood, and your desire to push for more. Now, for you high performers out there, what is extremely important, in fact, is that dopamine is one of the key ways to enter flow. Now, generally, flow is the ultimate brain state in which you're so deeply focused and immersed in the activity that you're currently doing that you literally forget everything else. Now, video gaming or extreme sports are a common example for flow triggering activities. So you basically get deeply absorbed in these things. Now, for example, to give you an overall view, every time you complete a task on your to-do list, your brain releases some dopamine to reward you with a pleasurable feeling. So you feel great and you're motivated to keep doing, to tick off more tasks on your to-do list. And likewise, if you crush a challenge, for example, if you run 10 minutes longer than the last time, you get this release of dopamine in your brain. This then motivates you to push harder the next time and harder and to do it over and over again. So in other words, if you get your dopamine from doing the activity itself, for example, drawing like it was in the study before, then that's the best thing that you can do to stay motivated in the long term. So the dopamine that you get from the activity, it will not only motivate you to repeat the activity in the future for more pleasure, but the dopamine that you get from the activity, so ideally the work that you do on a daily basis, obviously, this dopamine will then get you into flow. Now, what happens on a neurobiological level is that the dopamine that is released while you work, it actually sharpens your focus, it increases your attention, and as you work, you will slowly but surely become more and more flowy, because once again, dopamine unlocks the flow state over time. And overall, while it might be a bit difficult when you start working, so I think you definitely know this mental block when you're just about to start a new task. But over time, things will start to feel more and more effortless. You will notice that your surroundings disappear as your focus deepens. Time disappears at some point, and 5 hours can even feel like 5 minutes. And also your body awareness disappears over time. and you feel like you merge with the task at hand. That's how deeply you will be focused at what you do at some point. And it can even get so addictive that you might have to pee, for example, but you hold it because you're basically so glued to what you're doing. You're so glued to your screen at work, for example, that you just don't want to stop. You just don't want to waste time going to the toilet. I have this often, by the way. So you just want to keep flowing, basically. Now, when it comes to deep focus and flow, that's also where passion and purpose enter the game. Because if you love what you do and you make use of your passion to make a greater positive impact in the world, then you are more likely to stick with the activities that you do because you want to do them. And because you want to do the activities, because you love what you do, this means that you will get more dopamine from what you do. And in turn, if you get more dopamine from what you do, then it will be easier to get into flow. It's a super productive flow state. And because flow again is addictive and feels incredible, you learn to enjoy the activity that you do even more. Not to mention that you get a 200% boost in meaning and fulfillment, 500% boost in productivity, and 430% increase in creativity by being in flow. These are actually stats that were done by the Flow Research Collective. So it's basically a positive upward spiral that will make you your very best by design if you get things right. Now, also key is that how you look at the events in your life affects the amount of dopamine that you get from an activity or from a reward. So the frame that you put on things in your life matters. What this means is that you can subjectively influence whether dopamine is released in your brain or not. Now, for example, it matters whether you decide to celebrate a win or not, if you remember that. If you celebrate your win and you hype yourself up, you party, you pump yourself, then you will get the dopamine high, of course, but you will also get a very deep slump in your mood and your motivation the next day. On the other hand, if you suppress your hype about winning, you will not get the same dopamine high, of course, but you also will not get the slump in motivation and your mood afterwards. For example, when I had my first publication out about the neuroprotective effects of the hunger hormone ghrelin in the brain during Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, I was pumped. I was happy as fuck. And I felt like a real neuroscientist for the first time in that moment. Literally, honestly. But I actually suppressed my urge to celebrate this. And I did this on purpose because I was already thinking about writing the next publication. And I didn't want to ruin my motivation and my momentum with celebrating. I wanted to keep my motivation where it was right now. And likewise, if you frame challenge as something positive, so pushing a challenge, then it will be rewarding for you. You will get dopamine every time you push a little bit further to motivate you to keep going. For example, if you love pushing yourself 5 minutes longer, if you do this over and over and over again, then again, it will release the dopamine. It will keep you motivated. But on the other hand, if you see challenge as something bad, if you see challenge as arduous and strugglesome, they will not get dopamine from completing challenges. And again, if you don't get dopamine from challenges, then you will mess yourself up in the long term because you will not be able to stay motivated. Now, crucial is also that dopamine it affects motivation and your mood across all areas of your life. And why is that? Simply because there's only one single molecule, dopamine, that regulates motivation, pleasure, and reward. It regulates it in every single context in your life. For example, if you take drugs like marijuana, it can actually increases your dopamine in your brain by 1,000-fold. I do not recommend to ever touch drugs, just to say it, that it can increase the dopamine by 1,000-fold, so you can imagine how incredibly pleasurable this probably feels. And in comparison to that, sex actually only doubles dopamine in your brain. And again, that's a problem of that is actually that drug addicts, they often experience anhedonia and an extreme lack of motivation. So what that means is that drug addicts, they cannot enjoy their life anymore, because in comparison to the immense amount of dopamine and pleasure that drugs give, the dopamine from daily activities is just minuscule. It's just a joke, basically. And likewise, if you indulge in porn, which releases a lot of dopamine, then the enjoyment you get from sex, for example, will be lower as well. Believe it or not, there are actually many things in your life that release dopamine in your brain. For example, just ingesting food increases dopamine by 50%. Nicotine in cigarettes, if you're a smoker, boosts dopamine by 150%. And even stimulants like coffee and energy drinks can boost dopamine in your brain. There are also many activities in your daily lives. Video gaming, Netflix and other streaming services, those freaking cat videos on social media, the news, etc. So all of these things, they actually release massive amounts of dopamine. And that's a problem, because that causes you to desensitize to dopamine. Now, the problem is that the more dopamine you stack in your life, the less responsive you become to dopamine. And it's actually comparable to coffee. Now, if you drink 5 cups of coffee a day, then a single cup of coffee has no effect, doesn't boost you any longer. And likewise, the same is true for dopamine. For example, if you check your phone between sets in the gym, you need 3 freaking energy drinks to hype yourself up, and you need music every time you go to the gym, then it will be very hard to enjoy the activity itself. That means training in the gym without phone, without energy drinks, and without music. So you stack too many dopamine producing things. On the other hand, if you just train, if you just get your dopamine from training itself, it will be more pleasurable and more enjoyable for you. And that's also one of the reasons why dopamine detox is so valuable for your motivation, and also if you generally want to experience more enjoyment in your daily life. And during dopamine detox, you in fact remove as many of these dopamine stimulating activities in your life as possible, for example, for a month or for another set amount of time. So that would mean no social media, no Netflix, no checking emails over 30 days. And I'm not kidding, that's what statistics show, in fact. So no music, less frequent food intake even, which means that you can do intermittent fasting and you would skip breakfast or lunch, for example. And in turn, while you're then dopamine fasted, even a little bit of dopamine that you get from knocking out the key task at work or even reading a freaking book will feel like a really big thing for you. Makes sense that, for example, if you haven't eaten in 16 hours, you're starving, then even a freaking salad can become delicious, right? And it's the same principle with dopamine. Now, many people report that dopamine detox actually has helped them to increase their focus, their mental clarity, and their motivation at work. It also makes many people feel less distracted, because dopamine itchiness to check their phone every 5 minutes is of course not there anymore if you don't allow yourself to check your phone, if you're dopamine phased, that is. What you also must know, lastly here, is that serotonin counterbalances dopamine. Now, serotonin is the other main happiness neurochemical besides dopamine, and serotonin is released via gratefulness, for example. Now, I made a separate video about the incredible effects of gratefulness in your brain, and believe it or not, gratefulness is actually the only scientifically backed habit to permanently raise your base level of happiness. Now, in the video link, you actually explain to you what gratefulness does in your brain and how to use gratefulness step by step so that you can improve your happiness and your success with it. Again, link in the comments. But back to the video. Generally, if serotonin levels are high in your brain, you feel calm, you feel relaxed, and you feel content with what you have. You feel satisfied, in other words. Altogether, what this means is that you need to learn to appreciate what you have, because things such as gratefulness, they will release serotonin in your brain to make you feel satisfied and content. And on the other hand, you want to leverage the motivation and the drive that you get from doing the activities that you love and from desiring more So that would be dopamine. That also said you always want to have an activity that you're passionate about, and you always want to have a goal and desire in front of you to get your dopamine from. Because again, if you don't have an activity or a goal that gives you your dopamine, then the what now thought might occur. And it also makes sense to stack both. That means to have an activity that you passionately enjoy and to shoot for a big goal that you deeply desire, so that you can leverage dopamine as well as the drive and the flow it gives you to your personal advantage. Now, of course, in turn, if you don't have that, if you don't have an activity that you love, if you don't have a goal that you desire, then of course you will lose your source of dopamine, you will lose your motivation, and you will lose your drive. You will lose the feeling of meaning and fulfillment. And that is actually the case in many mental disorders like depression. That said, at this point, if you're interested in becoming your very best, both personally and professionally, then I would like you to offer my new neuroscience and psychology-backed high-performance course with coaching by me. And I will run the course with a few selected individuals in January 2022, so very soon, in a month, in fact, and or in 1.5 months to be precise. And what the course involves is that we will, one, find your passion, your purpose, so your inner why and your bigger mission in life. And it will also map out crystal clear goals to make your bigger ambitions in the world a reality. Second, we can reprogram your brain so that you can acquire any empowering belief or behavior that you desire. More courage, for example. Then 3, we will optimize your routine, your schedule, and your productivity with the best time and task management systems out there. Then, of course, we will get you into flow with your work, that is, so that you get that 100% focus and attention, 200% meaning and fulfillment, 500% productivity, and 430% creativity boost, as the statistics show. And lastly, of course, we will optimize the dopamine and serotonin release in your brain so that you have increased motivation, attention, focus, and life satisfaction. So this is basically even more dopamine and serotonin management strategies beyond what I can tell you in a single video, and to add on to what you've learned today. Now, there will be a 100% money back guarantee because I personally will ensure that you will leave this course as your very best self if you join. So you're really gonna lose, guys. So if you're interested, just contact me before the end of December, by the 28th of December, via email at niklas.peterreich@gmail.com, provided that there's still spots left, to reserve your spot and, of course, get an early bird discount. Now, I actually struggled with depression myself, and I turned my life 180 degrees. And that is also the reason why I have become a coach and why it is my mission in my life to help you crush your biggest goals. And that concludes the video. So as always, thank you for your time and attention. And if you enjoyed the video and if you want to support the channel, please like, subscribe, and share the video with your friends and those who could benefit from it, so that we can build an army of neuroscience and high performance enthusiasts together. I would strongly appreciate it. Also, I'm curious, what strategies to stay motivated have you tried, and which of these were successful for you? Let me know in the comments. Now, generally, the neurobiology of motivation is the same for all of us. And understanding the processes in your brain and using what you have learned in this video will be beneficial for your future breakthrough. So please, make use of dopamine and make use of it to accomplish the great goals that you have in mind for yourself. That said, have a driven week, high performers, and I will see you in the next video.